So I'm Mike Hollers. I'm a professor of medicine and immunology, a rheumatologist. I spend about 75% of my time doing research and about 75% of my time working with CU Innovations. And it's a theme that you'll hear, I think, remarkably throughout this series of discussions. We have a really outstanding panel of innovators and entrepreneurs to discuss their pathways and their pivots. We will return to a theme that Gali started off with, which is there is no single pathway that takes you forward. There are a series of successes, there are some failures, and we'll try to go through some of those as examples. After the individuals introduce themselves, we'll have a series of questions, some of which came from the audience in a preamble state, and then we'll open it up for questions. So with that, I'll turn it over and let Malik introduce himself.
Malik Hook, I'm an ophthalmologist, cataract and glaucoma specialist. I've been here for about 20 years. I did residency here, went away to Pittsburgh for a year, do fellowship, and came back with the mandate to not just do clinic and surgery, but also to start a device incubator, which is what I'll talk about today.
Jerome?
I'm Jerome Fox. I'm on the faculty of the Chemical and Biological Engineering Department in Boulder, where my lab works on sort of synthetic biology applied enzymology, so like the enzymology of systems. And we spun out a company called Think Bioscience, which is based in Boulder, focused on developing small molecule drugs for difficult, usually famous protein targets. And we went through a raise last year, which maybe we'll talk about. And yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. And yeah, very excited.
Robin?
Hi, everybody. I'm Robin Dieterding. I'm Chief of Pediatric Pulmonary and Sleep Medicine over at Children's Hospital. And I do a lot of different things. I'm by training, I have leadership roles over at Children's. I'm involved clinically. And then from a research perspective, I lead a rare disease network where I think about clinical trials and application of research. And then what spins out of that is how you think about ideas that can improve care out of the clinical environment, whether it be devices or whether it be the way care is delivered. So I've been involved in 3 different startups to think about that and have patents in that regard and have some successes and some failures that we can talk about.
Terry?
Yep, I'm Terry Fry. I'm also in the Department of Pediatrics. I'm a pediatric hematologist, oncologist, actually a bone marrow transplant physician. I got here in 2018 after about a 30-year career at the National Institutes of Health, where I led the CAR T-cell program. I ended up in industry somewhat by serendipity. About 5 years ago, I joined the executive team at Sana Biotechnology. Took them through an IPO. I'll talk a bit about that serendipity. So I still do a fair amount of consulting in the industry.
Great, thank you. So I think the first question, and we'll start with Malik as we go through this, but is if you sort of take yourself back to the beginning, when you were an academician, these are all very successful traditional academics, but at some point you came to this realization that you wanted to do something different and that potentially to move things forward in a different way. If you could reflect on that, we have many early career faculty members in the audience, trainees. I'm sure they'd love to hear what was the light bulb that said, I want to do something different.
So I think the first lesson is don't sit first on the stage when questions are coming in, because you're going to get the first question each time. So like I said, I've been here for 20 years as a faculty member. But as a resident, when we started doing surgery second or third year, and during surgery, I found myself thinking I could do this a little bit better if I just had this one thing, right? If I just had this one piece of, instrumentation or this different packaging of medication. And then I went away to fellowship, and I did fellowship in Pittsburgh with a doctor named Joel Schumann, who was one of the inventors of optical coherence tomography that we use for eye imaging, and it's used for other branches of medicine. And I remember sitting in his office and seeing patents and thinking, well, if he can do it, then I can do it, right? So that brought me back over here when Naresh Mandava took over as chair. And that switch from full-time academics for me never happened because I came in with the mandate of publishing, seeing as many patients, starting to develop a glaucoma service, which we didn't have a full glaucoma service here, and then to develop devices. And I had ideas for devices as I was going through training. And so I started working with different companies, learning the ropes, talking to the different stakeholders internally to learn how to do things. And that eventually led to us making our own devices, which we eventually either commercialized or we spun out as companies. One of the companies that we recently spun out, well, recently, it's been 7 years, it seems recent, is Spyglass Pharma. And I'll be talking about that a little bit today. So maybe some of the questions will lead me to talk about the difference between a device that you license and a company that you spin out. But that was kind of my pathway. It was never just academics. And it's hard to say just academics because that's a full-time job. So like you heard, I'm 100% academic, 100% company, 100% soccer dad. I do all of these things, right? So I'll pass it on.
Great, thank you. Jerome, so Jerome is a PhD scientist and from Boulder and has a bit different background than many individuals here, but can you tell us about how this came to you to start Think, or maybe even earlier than that?
Yeah, so Think came from when you start a lab as an academic, you usually have a few proposed research areas. And so it came from one of the research areas that was focused basically on using microbes to guide the biosynthesis of small molecules that have some sort of difficult biological activity, like mutant selectivity or that are allosteric inhibitors or something like this. And so one of the main experiments for this program succeeded before I had a major life event, which is that when I moved to Boulder, I found out I had a heart murmur, mechanical issue that I went to Cleveland Clinic to get fixed. Don't need to go back, so that was successful. But not being a dramatic person, when I found out about it, I thought, I'm going to die. So I was like, what do I want to do with my life? Like I started getting grants for my lab based on the foundational ideas. And I didn't feel like that was enough. And so at Cleveland Clinic, I decided that I wanted to develop a drug before I died. And so I came back and started the company. And that's been the guiding light for me as an entrepreneur, is that it will not be enough to sell this thing. It will not be enough to write cool papers, that this must work. And that, I think, is what got us through the last fundraise. So I'm happy to talk more about that later. But that's why I did it.
Good, thank you. And we'll come back to both of you in a bit. Robin?
So my journey started when Children's Hospital decided they wanted to think about an innovation center. And I ran into all these smart people, some of which have been on the stage. And it really, I began to understand that to go beyond taking care of patients, which I love to do, go beyond creating programs, which I love to do, and run programs, that to be transformational, you really needed to jump in and think about the future and be a part of the innovation that was possible to take things forward. So boy, did I jump in. I started 3 startups. Okay, that I wouldn't recommend that in the same period of time. But I learned about it, and I felt a passion of having pediatrics in the game. Pediatrics is 25% of the market, and yet the future is how we think about these kids. And when you looked across the terrain of children's hospitals, I began actually to feel responsibility. Like, we need to have people who understand clinical care, who think about these problems in the clinical realm. What do kids need? And this, I hope it doesn't sound arrogant, it wasn't, but like, if not somebody like me, who? Plus, it sounded fun. And I have a lot of side hustles. And so I began to think, how can we move the world forward in innovation in ways that were going to change the world in these ideas that were part of evolving teams at Children's, working with engineers to make the world better for kids. And those startups happened in different ways. 2 are on the market, and 1, which I'm listed as the president and CEO, has been dissolved. So we can talk about that. But that's okay. That's okay, because we took those ideas forward. So 2 have made it, 1 didn't, and that's how I got into it. I consider that still part of delivering the best care, and I think that's still academia.
Thank you. Terry.
Yeah, so my path into outside of academia was, I would say, as I mentioned earlier, serendipitous. As I mentioned, I led the CAR T cell program at the NIH, and I also had a translational lab that was developing therapies for children with refractory leukemia. And one of those was a chimeric antigen receptor targeting CD22 that we took in the clinic as a phase 1 study. And I will say that most of us were, at that time that we're in academia, that we're developing things to take in the clinic. I think it's probably still true. Often don't think about what we're going to do if it actually works, to be rather honest. I mean, I think we all, you do the mouse studies, we're all enthusiastic, but I don't think we think that far ahead. And I was lucky because that car actually was quite active, and we had about a 75% remission induction rate in a study that ultimately enrolled about 100 children. Along the way, that got licensed to a company called Geno Therapeutics, eventually got taken up by Celgene and then BMS. And I got to know the guy there who was their CFO. His name was Steve Haar. Steve actually later on, and I mentioned I came here in 2018, started a company called Sana Biotechnology. And about a year into the company, 2 years into the company, he called me up and he said, "Would you be interested in coming to lead the T cell therapeutics group?" And I said, "No, I'm an academic, no interest." He was persistent. And, I think what prompted me to take the jump was that I realized that early experience that I had with that CD22 CAR, as a traditional academic, I did not understand the world of industry and drug development outside of academia. And I realized that for me to be successful, as a translational researcher and to think about what to do with things that we developed in the lab, it was important for me to understand that other world. And so that was the reason I left. I will say when I left, I didn't know if I was going to come back. I wasn't sure. I told Steve that I'd give it a try, and I told him that I would make a commitment to it. What brought me back was actually the Gates Institute, the creation of the Gates Institute. So honestly, for me, it was very much of a pull back into academia than a push out of industry. I enjoyed my experience in industry quite a bit, but no regrets for sure in terms of what the opportunity's been here. So.
Great. Thank you. And perhaps for our industry partners and potential funders in the audience, I think this is a common phenotype, if you will. It resonates with me, certainly. You have a certain dissatisfaction with the way things are going. You have a desire to have a larger impact. You're not really sure that you can possibly do that, but if not you, who? As Robin nicely put it. So I think when you're interacting with people like us, that's what drives us. So, I mean, it makes us good to work with and challenging to work with at times also. So going back to Malik, you started, I think, on a pathway of telling us about how you ended up with a certain approach in terms of commercialization, entrepreneurship. Maybe you can just keep on with that tact.
Yeah, I'll say, there are 3 phases that you go through that I can describe at least 20 years in. You start off and you really don't know anything, right? So you're throwing darts, you're trying to figure out, what's going to work. You end up doing 3 startups at the same time, right? And for me, I had a bunch of devices that I was working on at the same time and didn't have the skill set. I had the skill set that brought me through medical school and residency, but I didn't have any business acumen. I didn't even know what IPO stood for. Didn't know anything about regulatory. And then you get midway in your career and you figure out, okay, I can do this. I know what a 510K is, what a PMA is for those, doing the FDA lingo. But now 20 years in, I'm back to saying, I don't know what I'm doing anymore. I just did an IPO for Spyglass. I learned a whole new language. So you go through different phases. And the way that I approach things is I tried multiple things at the same time. And then I talked to colleagues and I presented things and I said, what would be most valuable to you? And sometimes it was a single device, and that device is not a company. And that's maybe something we can talk about during the Q&A. How do you know that something's a company versus something that you have to license? Is something just a product that fits in another company? My first couple of things were products, not companies. So I licensed them to bigger companies. And then I learned the lingo from them, and I learned how to go through clinical trials, and I learned the regulatory aspects of it, which then took me to a platform product that we came up with that became a company. And that company then spun out. One was acquired by a company called Alcon in 2017. And then the Spyglass Pharma, which is our current company, which ended up IPOing and going public. We're on NASDAQ. We just listed February 6th of 2026 this year. So there are multiple pathways that you can take depending on identifying what the unmet need is and then figuring out, is it a product? Should I partner with somebody, or can I do this on my own? And this is where CU Innovations and all of the resources that we have available to us is just a godsend. When I first came here, we didn't have all that. Now you can actually sit down with people who know the lingo, know the business, and they help you decide which way to go, right? So I think that's a big thing, a big resource that we have on campus right now.
Good, thank you. We'll come back to that and at near the end and talk through some of the opportunities. So Jerome, again, how did you end up, starting a company? I think you're the CEO, and yet a full-time faculty member. So how did you decide to do that rather than license it or take another approach?
Yeah, so the first, I guess this relates to the last comment a little bit. The first thing I did was to go talk to the most cynical people I knew. And I bought plane tickets. I flew to Boston, I flew to Stanford, literally the most cynical people in my network, including my postdoc advisor, who I love, to ask them if this was a good idea. Like, should I do this? Should I start a company? Is there anything here? Folks who had started big companies like Genzyme, and they gave some feedback. It was, I'd say, pretty positive. And so then I kind of came back, and we had really leveraged our network actually in Boulder, Vern Norville and others who were alums of our school and very supportive of the local entrepreneur community. And Vern, of course, is like, just start this yesterday, it's very, which he would probably say to everybody. So then I went to JPM to try to meet a CEO. So I actually didn't want to be the CEO. I thought I was a professor. I didn't know anything. So I went to JPM reception, said, I'm a professor. Can you be my CEO? It was like very direct, which I've since realized was maybe too direct. And so that didn't work. So I did what a lot of academics do, which is I applied to the state and federal grants to get non-dilutive funding. So that's super effective. And it also gives you some training. A lot of these programs have workshops. So I made like a slide deck. And then I basically, long story short, found some co-founders after that initial work. One of them I married to, and one I met through the Harvard Business School program. And then we immediately, and I think this is key, and we can talk more about it later, went to venture capitalists. So we didn't rely on the grants. We kind of used that as initial momentum to get VC funding into the company. And for us, the reason for that was because developing a drug is difficult. And so I will answer the question. So then the investors that come in tend to be very in early stage biotech. I mean, these are crazy people. Like, why would you invest this early? So they come in and they really believe in the founders because they believe that only the founders will understand the technology enough to pivot and to come up with new ideas if there are issues. And so that is actually why I ended up being CEO, is sort of not through my intention or ever wanting to be one, but because the way the company kind of came about ended up having people around me that said and told me and taught me how to do it. And so we just raised last year, and that's continued. And now I feel like I'm stuck. So, we'll see.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Great story. Robin, so 3 startups at once, how did you do that? Which was the right way?
Yeah. So, well, I think kind of the bug of innovation and making a difference really caught hold. And they all happened very differently. I was part of a aerodigestive at Children's Hospital as a complex multidisciplinary clinic where we deal with the GI system, breathing, nutrition, ENT, otolaryngology. And so it's a big team. 3 of us do procedures at the same time. And out of that group, we decided we needed to do better for some of the kids who had eosinophilic esophagitis, fancy thing for allergy in your food tube. And these kids were going to the operating room for this every time they had to be evaluated. So our team came up with ways to do an endoscope. We started it with equipment we had in hand. Very good idea. And then had grateful patient, second really good idea, come on board, who got excited that everybody in the whole country should have this. And so this is how innovation happens. You get with people who have cross thoughts and they develop something out of a system here. The GI person in that group went on, we were all founders in the company, went on with the company. That company now is doing transnasal esophagoscopy in kids awake down to 2 years of age, so they don't have to go to the operating room. And they're in 60 children's hospitals, and there's now starting to be an adult hospital. Yay, success. Change the world, and that's really what it was about. It's not about, that was what our group was about. Second company, engineer, we were trying to develop something for kids with sleep. Long story short, we developed, we call it Friends Brain Band to look at sleep and very advanced signaling in the brain. It is selling commercially on the market, and I'm on the board of that company. Third company, my company, which was pediatric. It was my passion. Kids needed a platform. Kids needed a way to have monitoring at home, get them out of the hospital, get them off oxygen early, do all those things that we watch the adults do. You know what? It just is hard, okay? The pediatric market's hard. I knew that, but a passion sent me there. And we just couldn't deliver it in a way. I think the children's hospitals weren't there yet. That's an important thing. And you got to know when to say when. And so that company dissolved, but there's another company making its way that I hope to be helpful and moving along. So that was 2 out of 3 is not bad, and what I think can change the world. And one ending fact, oh my gosh, what I didn't know. I needed business people all around me. I made a lot of mistakes, and I had great business people from here. They set me up with people. Sharon Lake's in the audience. She's still amazing when I have questions. And so you gotta know what you don't know, and you gotta ask and ask and ask. And making mistakes takes you to a different place.
So I find that the third one fascinating because I think we weren't able to hear the entire noon discussion. However, the entire noon discussion was about their third company. So I think you should go back and do your third one all over again.
Sore subject.
Okay, now vision twice. So, okay. So Terry, you talked a bit more about how you got started and how you ended up. Maybe we can go to a different type of question, which is maybe let's take a look at the downside and something that happened that was unexpected and what you had to do to fix it.
Yeah, I mean, I think, my experience obviously making the transition from academia into industry was a little different, I think, than the other speakers on the podium, because I joined, I didn't start the company. It was actually started by Steve, and he called me and asked me to join the company. And to be clear, we were a startup, but we were a 350 person startup, and I had a 60 person research team. So, and most of the people in the company were from Genentech, and like I said, Steve took Juno through a purchase by Celgene, et cetera. So it was a bit of a large company culture in a small company, startup. And boy, was I a fish out of water. I felt like I had, R1s, I had been successful in the academic world, and I was not ready for that world. And so I would say for me, one of the biggest challenges, and maybe it's not exactly your question, but was trying to understand how to operate in a large, I'll call it startup, but I did not have complete control over all the decisions. We had a large board. If we went through the IPO early on, we were publicly traded, et cetera. And there were a lot of decisions that got made within the company that I would have made differently based as an academic investigator. But I think what was most valuable to me was losing some control, which we often have when we run our own labs, was actually important for me because I learned a lot about different perspectives. And looking back on it, I think I've become much more able to see perspectives that are different than my own and maybe, pivot and make decisions, even though they aren't where my passion lies, because it may be the right thing in terms of developing a drug effectively or whatever. And I think for me, that was the biggest learning experience being in that sort of a company.
No, thank you. Maybe I'll just reflect on my own experience also, which is I'm constantly asked by individuals, should I, start a company? Should I go work for the company? What should I do in the company? And the real question, and you so nicely addressed it, is, well, really, who are you? What are you? Are you an academic? And if you're an academic and you see the long term, you're constantly generating new ideas. And if you are going into industry, that's a tremendous challenge. There's a lot of team building, team science, and team activities that we're not trained to do. I had the same experience myself as a CSO part-time for a company. So I think it really is. Yet you want to work with individuals in industry who have tremendous skill sets and are absolutely necessary. So you have to find your role as an academic in this kind of industry, if you will. So thank you for bringing that up. And I always go back to that question: is who are you? You figure that out, and it sounds like you did figure that out. So thank you. Okay, we're going to jump back to Malik, and maybe reflect on some challenges you had that you were able to overcome in the development cycles that you've been involved in.
Figuring out who I am is the biggest challenge still.
That's a constant challenge for all of us, I think.
For every success that we might see in an email or, publicized, there are 10 or 12 failures. So we could have 3 of these sessions just on the failures that have happened. And the failures, maybe if I go through category of why things failed, that might be more useful. So how many clinicians do we have in the room? Just curious, clinicians. And then researchers, pure PhD research lab. So we have a lot more on that side. So from a clinician standpoint, what we spend a lot of time looking at, and the same thing happens on, with our PhD colleagues, is what is the unmet need? And a lot of times we like our own baby, whatever we created, and we think, of course, there's an unmet need. And you start working on it and you're 2 years into it and you're like, this is fabulous. It does everything. It's, shiny and it has bells and whistles. And then you take it out and everybody's like, actually, I have 10 things that can do that. And I get paid more for the other things that I have. So a lot of the failures happen when you don't identify the unmet need and do the research before getting into it. And I have a trail of skeletons and dead bodies when it comes to that. And I learned the tough way over the first 3 or 4 years. Subsequent to that, a big thing that we don't talk about a lot in big groups is the reimbursement part. It seems taboo in academics to talk about the reimbursement part, but it's just a fact of life. When you're fundraising, they're going to ask you that kind of stuff. Certainly when we were doing our roadshow for the IPO, it was all about reimbursement. What can we actually make off of this product? And I think we don't do that very well as MD, PhDs. We just don't think that way. So a lot of the failures happen where you have something, even if it works great, if there's no way for the healthcare system to understand how am I actually going to maintain the business of medicine, which is very important to do, then it's just not going to work. So I think those are the 2 big categories that we could spend a lot of time on. What's the unmet need? How is this distinguished? How's it going to make things better? That's the unmet need. And then how can this be viable in the healthcare ecosystem that we live in today?
No, thank you. I think it also points out the value of working with your physician colleagues also as a PhD scientist, to really help understand
both ways. Yeah,
absolutely.
Just a note on that just really quick. So Dave Epstein, who's one of my mentors who has passed away, always used to say that for every MD that I have in my department, he was chair of ophthalmology at Duke, I'm going to pair every MD with a PhD. They need to talk. They have to do that hallway passing by. Let's get lunch. Let's, do dinner. And that has been really valuable for us as well here. That crosstalk that has to happen is essential because we live in different worlds, but we have similar goals and we can help each other along the way.
Great, thank you. And ophthalmology certainly is a great example of that across many disciplines. Okay, Jerome, challenges, any failures along the way?
Yeah, I would build on that. I think as an academic, you think very simply, like if a mutation causes cancer, if it's the driver, and you make a molecule that selectively inhibits that mutant, surely that's a drug, and everyone would want to support your company. Not the case, it turns out. So we found this. So when we raised our last round, we had, we have a platform technology, but we have a lead program, and as a therapeutics company, you're going to get evaluated for the lead program, even if they like the platform. And so that program is in lead op. We designed the clinical trial all the way through approval, trials, I should say. We went out to pharma to assess and find potential acquirers. We figured out how market access and pricing would work for the drug. This is like something that you would find in an academic lab, and you're putting together this entire trajectory. And so that's something I didn't know about. And so we probably had 20 physicians helping us on that journey. So it's a disease called Noonan syndrome and affects lots of systems. It has no approved therapeutic, which is a whole nother thing. And so I think that was like indication selection, we would call it, is something that you don't really learn how to do in academia, because you kind of look for a good, clear technical challenge that may have patients that don't have treatments, but that's not really enough for companies. And so I think just kind of learning how to put that story together. And the thing is, like, so this cancer thing is real. Like, we still have a program that we think could treat a small set of cancer, small being like tens of thousands of cancer patients, and we will do that. But we had to figure out how to sell a story around a larger market to support that later on. And so I think that was like a huge struggle for me, because in the beginning I was like, I kind of didn't listen to people. I just felt like this can't be true. The patients with this mutation are dying, but it was true. So that listening to that and kind of pivoting and restructuring our pitch around this other lead program, I think was critical for us. So that was a big learning.
But I think that's a terrific and very appropriate example that, when I started, I had the same thing. I had made this wonderful discovery that everybody should want to use that discovery, yet nobody did. So, you had to start and you had to go, and you had to sort of push it along over many years, and also learn what is the actual driver. Alex said very nicely, also, what's the driver of value in this kind of environment? So we're going to go to audience questions here in a few minutes. But what I wanted to do to make sure that we talk about it is, for those of you who have not gone to the high impact booth outside, please go out there and pull a flyer so that you can go take a look at it. High Impact is a brand new program that's being built out by CU Innovations, and it is essentially a stem to stern or beginning to commercialization learning platform that is being developed. If you have an idea, there's a button you can go push and you can get into a navigation trajectory. So there's one of the difficulties that we've seen over the years has been an inability to figure out who do you talk to in CU Innovations. And this is now a really, I think, nicely well-designed system to be able to do that. I'm going to return to Robin, because Robin's had a lot of time with CU Innovations, and maybe just to reflect a bit on how you've interacted with the group and what are the various activities that Innovations can help you with.
So nothing but positive things to say. I would say that I've been in the sphere of CU Innovations since 2017. And really taught me an understanding that an idea alone isn't good enough. I think that you've been hearing this. An idea alone isn't good enough. You have to layer around it the business plan. And if you're doing clinical work, you have to layer around it who wants it, how they're going to pay for it, what's the infrastructure going to support it. And then you need some support. So CU Innovations has been very helpful to think about that, to provide funding, small startup money to get your ideas further, to connect you with people, to business people, because the company of Robin Dieterding alone is a bad company, okay? And so to layer in, because I just don't have all the skill sets. I'm good in my lane. That's what I like to say. Get me in my lane. And so, but they layered in amazing business folks that really provide an opportunity, and I learned so much. So I think it's only gotten better since I think I was early in the startup business. They now have, if you can push a button and do that, that's good. It saves a lot of different sleepless nights. I learned not to take things out too early. They would have told me that, and it went out with my company and came right back in because patents are really expensive. And so I think the resource of CU Innovation is amazing. It would have saved me a lot of heartache, a lot of understanding about how to do things better, a lot of pairing up, which I tried to do with amazing people to teach you how to do things. So it's such a resource. And we are so lucky when you look around the country and think about what others have to have that resource here. How's that for a commercial?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Yes. I think for the business, certainly for the industry or potential venture groups, business development is your entree, if you will, into CU Innovations to really connect with all the great ideas that are going on that you see here and that you've seen during the day and that live just a few floors above us. So I think with that, I'm going to open up for questions in the audience. I think we have one to start off with up here, our leader. Yes.
I didn't want
Emily,
to
you
go
start.
first, but yeah, but I'm just so amazed when I look at this panel. I mean, I think looking at all of you, this is like the successful group of people that have come and done this out of this university, each and every one of you. When I think about all the people who are in the room today, maybe if you could talk a little bit, if you could go back, what would be the biggest lesson that you have? Because there's a lot of people here who want to be in your shoes someday. And, now you have the benefit of getting to the successful part. And so any advice you have for people getting started today?
Okay. We'll let Terry start at that end. Okay. What's your number one piece of advice?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I heard that earlier today there was a conversation about nonlinear pathways, which, maybe is another, at least for me, was my story. I would not say that my experience in industry was ever planned. I had my entire academic career planned out in front of me. And I would say that the biggest lesson I learned was when I got that call to join Sana Biotechnology. I told you, I said, Steve, forget it. I mean, I'm an academic. I know nothing about this world. And he called me up and he talked to me, and I sort of opened up my mind a little bit and said, this actually might be valuable for me to learn. And so I took a risk, right? I mean, I'd been here only about 4 years. I was just getting my lab going. I had R1s, I had DOD grants, et cetera. And I took a jump 75% in industry at a time that I was not planning for. And I think sometimes you got to be willing to, to take risks and follow where the opportunities lead you. And it isn't always planned. At least in my case, it certainly wasn't planned. So that'd be one piece of advice I'd give you.
Great. Thanks. Robin?
Yeah, go follow your passion. If you say, I'm going to do this, I have an idea, surround yourself with the people who can get you there. Go. Don't think of the million, what if this, what if, learn and go, because it's going to take you to a different place. Like, I don't regret I regret going out too early and paying some of my own money. I regret that. But besides that, I learned so much. I told people, well, even with that was like a master's and PhD of business and how to think about things. So I don't follow your passion, ask, move. If you have an idea, be smart about it, but go. Don't, go and follow your passion. It'll take you to a different place. And I will tell you that the startup mentality is now my leadership mentality. My leadership is a startup leadership style. I know who my funder is. It's Children's Hospital Department of Pediatrics. I think in those ways, like, and how am I aligning? How am I pitching? How do we pay? Who are going to do this? Who's going to be? It's a startup mentality. And so it has totally changed how I think. So follow that passion, jump in. There are some things you have to think about in academia, around conflict of interest. So I will mention this one thing. So I jumped in on on boards, and I'm on companies that has limited. I know people aren't talking about limitation, but you should understand that, my biggest international conference, American Thoracic Society, which I had been involved in different ways and probably was on a trajectory to lead, that was not going to be a path anymore as long as I was in companies. But that was okay. I mean, that was a trade I made. So just understand that, but I wouldn't do it any differently. I would continue to follow it, and I still make mistakes today.
Yeah, I don't know where to begin really, but I think pitching is listening. It's a conversation. So I think one of the keys in early fundraising is to kind of learn from the investors, as well as telling them, you want to tell them the future, but you also kind of want to be like, what do you think about that? Like, do you agree with? If you pull them into the story, you know, shares of your company are bought, they're not sold. And so when you tell a story to raise money from investors, there are a million companies they can be investing in. And they only invest in yours when they feel like not only do they believe in it, but they're part of it and they can help. And so I think that's a big learning for me in terms of becoming a better entrepreneur, but also building a better company is bringing lots of other people into the story. So this balance between like being crazy to like do something new and also listening to people, you got to go back and forth between those two things. If you just have the crazy, it's not going to work. So, well, maybe for some people, but yeah.
Alec.
It's worked okay so far. Right?
Say names.
I'll mention a couple of things briefly. One thing, if you're thinking about doing anything in the innovation space, devices, medications, find somebody who's already done it and see if you can get their time. That's the hard part, right? If they're at my stage right now, I can barely breathe, but if somebody's a little bit later and you can, grab them for coffee or something like that, you'll save years, right? The other one is, how many of you know what, we have a younger crowd in the back. Do you even know what a Rolodex is? So this is something that I love to tell the younger professors that are joining us. Have a Rolodex that goes beyond your crowd, your research group. So one of my things that I feel very proud about is if somebody comes to me and they say anything about industry, any space, whether it's R&D or clinical, I know 5 to 10 people across industry that I can call tomorrow and ask questions. We select for an introverted phenotype in academia. I'm very much the introvert. So after today, I'm going to go to a dark room and just rock for a couple of hours to recover from this. And I see some people clapping. That was overwhelming to me that you just clapped, right? So I think that you have to overcome that and get out there. And I can tell you for the first 10 years of my career, I was traveling every week. I was at every conference. I was in Europe. I was in Asia. I was meeting people. I was knocking on doors. And I think if you can do those two things, find somebody who's done it, and then find a deep bench that you can call on. Those are two things. And of course, I agree with everything else that was said, but just two slightly different things there.
Great. No, thank you. Actually, for me, I just want to reflect on what Jerome said. So I think one of the hardest things to do when you're an academician is to go present your work, and rather than get accolades, you get hard questions. And it can be very depressing at times. So I think what I've advised people and work on myself is to always think about that as an opportunity, because the questions are always relevant. They can drive you back to the lab to address them and actually, improve the whole process. So it's an opportunity to be able to move things forward like that. So. All right, we'll open it up for questions at this point.
Try and pick an introvert somewhere in the crowd, call them out.
Right. We're going to find one or two. Okay, yes, in the middle. Well, they're coming over to, there's one on the way back and one in the middle. And before I forget, over there is Lily Feldman, who's the architect, if you will, of high impact. So I pointed a number of you in that direction. So Lily just graduated with a PhD and is now has a 150% job also. It's being a postdoc and working in CU Innovations. Okay, so maybe we'll start in the middle first and then go to the back.
Yeah, so I have a kind of question. Most of you are MDs. So how that helps you with your like understanding the problem? Most of us is here PhDs. It's more difficult for us to figure out what's really important.
Yeah, I can take start at least. So I mentioned Dave Epstein, who's a prominent glaucoma specialist, passed away a few years ago. He always used to say, in the best sense of the meaning, that the clinic was your laboratory for the MDs, right? So we're there, we see the problem, we identify the unmet need. Most of the time, we understand what the problem is, but we don't know how to approach it. If it's a new medication or even a new device where we can go to our bioengineering group or knock on different doors in the engineering departments. So the best possible thing we can do on campus is to make sure that our basic research team members are talking to our clinic team members, because we need each other. So when you ask, how are the MDs doing it? We're not doing it without a skill set that you might bring to the table, right? So I think that's the important thing that we have to increase on campus. We're doing a much, much better job of that today compared to when I joined 20 years ago. Now, on the flip side, you might have a very interesting line of work that could turn into a platform technology where you haven't necessarily identified where it would fit in clinically. So then you would come and knock on the door of the MD and say, I just want to show you what I have and have a discussion. I can't tell you how many times that leads to a company that I know about at different universities. So I think it works both ways.
Great, thank you. I think this is something we can be working on, Lily, in addition to everything else you're working on, is being able to make that connectivity, because I agree entirely. It is absolutely essential. And there's so many great ideas that are cooking in the basic science departments here that I think have a lot of opportunity. Maybe we'll go in the back for a question.
Hello. I'm just wondering, knowing what you guys know now, is there something that you would have tried to learn during your training, your PhD or your postdoc, that you think would have better positioned you to create these companies and do the amazing work that you've been able to do?
Learn how to tell a story. So I think one of my joke that's also not a joke is that before we did our big raise last year, I was teaching a 400-person general chemistry class to undergrads. Great preparation. I mean, I think that's what raising is. It's teaching. And so I think, not to say like if you're doing a postdoc and I'm going to get like an angry letter from a PI, like just go teach a class. But I think just thinking about storytelling and communication and teaching and engagement with people as a conduit to build a company with them, get them excited about what you're doing. I think that's something that I would learn if you don't feel comfortable with. And I'm also like a big introvert, so I get like super nervous before any of these things. And I think if practice make some of that go away.
We're all introverts up here, except maybe Robin.
I'd love to add to that. I'll tell you, I agree completely. And I'll tell you a little story about myself so I told you I joined Sana. I was pretty late in my career. I had grants. I'd given lots of, large presentations at scientific meetings. I was really good at telling the complexity of my science, right? I mean, we are all good at that and talking about how it's so hard for other people to understand it, et cetera. So I remember the first board meeting at Sana. Our board was not a scientific board. So one of our board members was the CEO of Costco and then started DocuSign. We had these were, and I was told to prepare slides on my section on T-cell therapeutics. And I said to Steve, these guys aren't scientific. I'm not going to be able to explain it to them. And Steve looked at me and was like, these people are brilliant. If you can't explain it to them, you're in trouble. And I think, for me, it was really eye-opening that I needed to think differently about how I told my scientific story. So I think that's very important. And we do not do a very good job in academia helping folks tell their scientific story in a way that's accessible, even outside the scientific community. But if you can't do that, you're dead in the water.
Thank you. There are some interesting programs here now for education, science education for the lay community that can be very helpful, I think, for individuals. I would also just point out that there are fellows who are working with CU Innovations, and we have at least one or two over there. And maybe they can tell you what it's like. But there are ways to work in business development and licensing and some of the other areas within high impact. So, and we do have medical students, graduate students, postdocs who are working, and Lily's the right initial contact for that, or just push the button and you can get navigated there. Okay, we are at the end of our time, and we can take one more question if there's not any last ones. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the, oops, wait a minute. Oh, we have one. Yes, go ahead.
My name is Daniela Ibarra. I am a CU Denver business student, and I am currently starting a startup with kind of a niche, what I would consider an unmet need. But my question is when every founder says they're going after an unmet need, I understand my need very well. How do you actually not take it personal when then you go and try it out, and if that is an actual need or not? I was very admired by your success stories, but even more admired by your failure stories and kind of your pivots from FDA to licensing. That's kind of where I am, understanding the difference between needing to go FDA and wanting to go FDA. Yeah, how do you like not take it personally?
So maybe I would just say, every successful business is founded on top of failures. I think everybody up here certainly has had that experience. I mean, the first company I tried to start, they couldn't even spell it correctly when I was talking to them. So
maybe you should take it personally. Stop me on the way out, and I'll tell you a little bit more because we're running out of time. But maybe you should take it personally. There's a lot of passion involved with what we do, and I can tell you there's one device that I have on the market right now that was launched in 2015 that 10 companies passed on. I took it personally every single time. And that device is now the second most common glaucoma procedure that's done around the world, right? Because I didn't stop and I took it personally, and blood, sweat, and tears, literally all three, right? To get it to where it was. So I take everything personally. He said something to me that I took personally when we walked on stage right now. I'm not going to forget what he said. So talk to us about those things. Don't lose that. Whatever, that's going to light the fire, and it's going to continue the fire going.
So maybe the last point that I'll make is timing is everything. And you are probably too early. So keep it up and talk with Malik. You can go into...
Run out of here.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else want to say anything?
Yeah, I agree with that. You take it I mean, I take this personally that I couldn't bring that across the line for kids. And so how do I continue to fuel that? Maybe it's not in this company, but it doesn't mean I haven't let go of what is needed, what the idea is. And so now I'm smarter about it. Maybe I won't run a company, but I still believe I'm a voice for that, to bring this to kids, because I do take it personally that we couldn't do it for kids. So keep going, just look, pivot. It's not linear.
Okay. A bunch of introverts won't stop. So, okay. All right. Again, thank you to our panel for your very important and useful insight.